day my mother found out she was dying, she asked me to go out and buy her these glass marbles. Daddy and I hadn't even known she was ill, which was nothing unusual, because anytime you asked her if she was sick, she'd throw things at you. She'd say, "Don't suggest such suggestible things to such suggestible people." Anyways, I bought her these marbles and she counted out 90 of them. She put them in this old glass bowl that just happened to be the sum total of my Aunt Helena's estate. Now apparently the doctors had given her 3 months to live, and she said, "Great story by the doctors," because of the closest thing to the Old Testament that we had. I wouldn't even give 2 bits for those young, smiley guys, she'd say. I'd go for a stern, feral physician. She wouldn't even get her teeth cleaned by a dentist under 50. So I bought her the marbles and she put them in the bowl on her bedside table. And she went out and spent $1,200 on nightgowns. She said, "In my family, you aren't dying unless you take to your bed." And that's exactly what I'm doing. Oh, we hashed it around. Dad said she couldn't possibly be dying, but the doctors convinced him. I told her it seemed a little medieval to just lie up there in that state, but she said she didn't want to be distracted from what she loved the most, us. What she wanted to know, then she said, there was nothing inside except for drugstores, supermarkets, dry cleaners, and that given a situation, they were beneath her dignity. Now, I asked her what she intended to do up there. She said, study French, visit with us, generally mole, and maybe call a few pals. Study French. She always pledged herself years ago that she would die bilingual, and that's exactly what she was going to do. She said from then on in, the doctors had to come and see her because, as she put it, she came in with a house call and she was going out with a house call. And all day, every day, she held one of these marbles in her hand, and she said it's because it makes the day longer. Now, Mom always had her own bedroom. That's the way it's always been as long as I can remember. He could really get into a nightmare, and apparently, early on in the marriage, he flipped over and broke her nose, and that was it. Separate beds. The room was very spare, really only an old brass bed, oak dresser, and a bedside table, and don't ask me why, but a hat rack. See, there were no pictures on the walls, and she never understood how people could look at the same darn thing every day. We'd sit with her after dinner and talk about issues. She said she was too far gone for gossip and what we ate for lunch. And then we'd all turn in after a little while, just before I drifted off, to hear her drop the marble. And it happened every night. Now, after the 3rd or 4th day, I saw one on the floor and started to pick it up. She said, "Leave it." She said it very sharply. I asked how come. She said she was learning to let them go. Oh, she passed the time. There were things she wanted. She wrote down lists of children's books from her childhood. We got as many as we could find in the library, and she said they were still the only good books she ever read. She wrote notes to, I don't know, maybe 60 or 70 people. And they later on told us that they were sort of something not very significant, but an old thing, that in each of them she included a recipe in every one of them. There were also formal goodbyes. We got out the cookie tin full of snapshots that somehow never turned into a scrapbook. She liked that. She showed my father how to do medical insurance and how she handled the accounts, and we went through the jewelry. She wrote down the names of the roofers and the plumbers and the air conditioning people, and she called it wrapping it up. Well, this is good, she said. I'm wrapping it up. She had the television moved into her bedroom, and she told me inside to say that it was entirely possible for her to reach a stage where she couldn't really know what she'd be watching. And I promised her I'd always keep it on PBS. Later on, when things started getting really hard, she told me that she would like to spend more time alone. I'm afraid she said that I'm going to have to do this more or less by myself. She said she was happy and she hoped that we would be that. It was arranged that she could get less isn't worth going into. It was just hard, you know? That from that very beginning, now to the very last, she never admitted to any pain, never. She called it the chills. The last thing she asked for was a picture to her room of a Labrador retriever she and Dad owned when they first got married. He was a dreadful dog, but she thought that he was perfect, because when you're young, that's all you think. I was in bed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and I was lying there, and it was the middle of the night, and I heard a big crash. I walked into my mother's room, and all the marbles were spilled over, and her bedside table was on the floor. She was gone. By the time the paramedics got there was nothing they could do. And that was the end. I found this marble in her hand that day, and I keep it because it makes the days longer.